The star system was dying. One by one, the bright lights that had once been home to billions of Zilani people were going out forever. Ambassador Veltar stood in the command center of their last remaining space station, his forearms trembling. As he watched the tactical display, red dots marked the enemy positions, millions of them, spreading like a disease across what had once been peaceful worlds. The harvester machines had appeared 3 months ago, from the dark space between galaxies. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't even seem to hate. They just consumed everything in their path, turning entire planets into raw materials for building more of themselves. It was like watching cancer spread through the galaxy. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Meridian colonies," reported Captain Zexani, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's 17 worlds in the past week." Veltar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3,000 years of peaceful civilization crumbling around him. The Zilani had never been warriors. They were farmers, artists, philosophers. Their greatest achievement had been creating a society where war was just an ugly word from ancient history books. They had defensive fleets, yes, but those ships were designed to patrol trade routes and rescue stranded travelers, not fight extinction wars. The massive view screen showed the latest battle reports. Their most advanced warships, vessels that had taken decades to build, were being torn apart in minutes by the mechanical swarms. The harvesters seemed to learn from every encounter, adapting their tactics faster than the Zilani could respond. It was like fighting an enemy that got smarter every time you shot at it. "What about the other species?" asked Commander Tilron from across the room. "The Vegan Republic, the Crystal Alliance." Veltar shook his head sadly. "The vegans were overrun last month. The Crystal Alliance is fighting for their own survival in the Outer Rim. Everyone who could help is already dead or running for their lives." The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Outside the station's windows, space was filled with the debris of destroyed ships, pieces of metal and ceramic that had once been someone's home, someone's hope for the future. Then young communications officer Yextar spoke up from her station. "Sir, there is one possibility. The new species, the humans. They made contact with the Galactic Council just last year." Several officers made sounds of doubt. The humans were barely out of their home system, still learning how to build proper spacecraft. What could such a primitive species do against an enemy that had already destroyed civilizations millions of years older? But Veltar was desperate. In the past 72 hours, they had lost more worlds than in their entire recorded history. "Do we have a way to contact them?" "Yes, sir. They established a diplomatic channel through the council networks." Veltar took a deep breath. It felt foolish to ask for help from a species that still used chemical rockets just decades ago. But what choice did they have? Send them everything: our tactical data, population centers, evacuation routes. Tell them we need any assistance they can provide. The message was transmitted across the vast distances of space, bouncing through relay stations and communication networks. Veltar didn't expect much. Maybe the humans could offer some refugee ships, or perhaps share some basic technology. Every little bit would help their people survive a few more days. The response came back so quickly, it startled everyone in the command center. A calm human voice speaking in accented galactic standard. Distress signal received and acknowledged. Fleet deployment authorized under Extinction Protocol 7. Estimated arrival, 72 hours. Maintain your current position and avoid contact with hostile forces until we arrive. The transmission ended, leaving the Zilani staring at each other in confusion. Fleet deployment. The humans were sending actual warships. Veltar felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps they would get a squadron of ships, maybe even a dozen if they were very lucky. It wouldn't be enough to win, but it might buy time for more evacuations. Captain Kim had been in space for 15 years, but he still got goosebumps watching a fleet jump. The bridge of his destroyer hummed with quiet efficiency as his crew monitored the arrival sequence. Through the main view screen, space itself seemed to tear apart as massive ships emerged from hyperspace jumps. "Contact in 3, 2, 1, called out Navigation Officer Lee from his station. The first ship to appear was enormous, a dreadnought so large it had its own gravity field. Then another materialized beside it, and another. Within minutes, the empty space around the Zilani system was filling up with human warships of every size imaginable. Kim watched the tactical display with professional interest. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers, support vessels, medical ships, supply transports. It was like watching an entire civilization's military might unfold in real time. The formation was perfect, each ship taking its assigned position with mechanical precision. "Sir, final vessel count is coming in," Lee reported, his voice slightly awed despite his training. 2,407 ships now in formation. The fleet stretches across 3 orbital paths. On the Zilani command station, the atmosphere had gone from desperate hope to shocked silence. Ambassador Veltar stood frozen in front of the main tactical display, his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides. The screen showed a cloud of blue dots representing human ships, so many that they looked like a second star field. "This cannot be accurate," whispered Captain Zexani. "The sensors must be malfunctioning." But the sensors were working perfectly. Every few seconds, another massive human ship would drop out of hyperspace and take its place in the formation. Some of the vessels were larger than Zilani's cities. The human carriers alone could house the entire population of a small planet. Communications. Officer Yextar's hands shook as she worked her controls. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human flagship. They're requesting to speak with you directly." Veltar tried to compose himself, smoothing down his ceremonial robes and straightening his posture. When the connection opened, a human face appeared on the main screen, an older man with graying hair and weathered features that spoke of long years in space. "Ambassador Veltar, I presume," the human said in perfect galactic standard. "I'm Admiral Park, commanding the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress call and came as quickly as we could," Admiral Veltar managed to say, his voice barely steady. "Your response is far beyond what we could have hoped for. When we sent the message, we thought perhaps you might spare a few patrol ships, ... Double quotes. Admiral Park's expression showed genuine confusion. "A few patrol ships. Ambassador, your message indicated an extinction-level threat to multiple civilizations. Did you expect us to respond with anything less than a full fleet deployment?" The casual way the human said, full fleet deployment sent waves of shock through the Zilani crew. This wasn't even their entire military. This overwhelming force that could probably conquer half the galaxy was just one of their fleets. "We are grateful beyond words," Veltar said carefully. "But surely such a massive response was not necessary for our small problem. ... Small problem." Park's eyebrows rose. "Ambassador, according to your data, these harvester machines have already consumed 47 civilizations. That's not a small problem. That's exactly the kind of threat humanity was designed to handle." The human admiral leaned forward slightly, and there was something in his eyes that made even the peaceful Zilani feel a chill. "Now, about these harvesters, where exactly do you need us to kill them?" The word kill hit the herbivorous crew like a physical blow. They were a species that had evolved from gentle plant eaters, creatures who had built their entire civilization around avoiding violence. The casual way this human discussed ending lives was deeply disturbing, but as Veltar looked at the tactical display showing the vast human fleet arranged in perfect battle formation, he realized something important. For the first time in months, he felt hope. These humans weren't just offering help, they were offering victory. "Admiral," he said, his voice growing stronger, "we have identified 17 major harvester concentration points. However, I must Warn you, their numbers are overwhelming. Park smiled, and it wasn't entirely reassuring. Ambassador, overwhelming numbers are exactly what we specialize in handling. Lieutenant Commander Song sat in the briefing room of the human cruiser, surrounded by holographic displays showing weapon specifications and tactical data. Across from her, a small Zalani officer named Kixtel was trying very hard not to panic, as Song walked him through humanity's standard military equipment. So these torpedo things, Kixtel said, pointing at the display with one of his thin, delicate fingers, they actually tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Song glanced up from her ammunition checklist, looking mildly surprised by the question. Oh, the quantum disruptors. Yeah, they mess with local spacetime to bypass enemy shields. Pretty standard stuff. We've been using them for about 20 years now. She scrolled to the next screen. These are what we use when we need to punch through really thick armor. Kixtel's large eyes grew even wider as he stared at the technical specifications. The numbers didn't make sense to him. No weapon should be able to generate that much destructive force. But the energy requirements alone would drain an entire planet's power grid. That's why we use fusion reactors, Song explained patiently, as if she were talking to a child. Each torpedo has its own power source. Pretty efficient, actually. She pulled up another display that made Kixtel's skin turn pale blue with fear. Now, these stellar engineering charges are really interesting. They can disrupt a star's nuclear fusion process, basically turning it into a weapon. We probably won't need them for this mission, but it's good to have options. The Zalani officer made a sound like air leaking from a balloon. You carry star-destroying weapons as regular equipment. Song looked confused by his distress. Well, only the small ones. The weapons that can actually blow up a whole star require special authorization from High Command. We're not allowed to carry those without direct orders from Earth. She noticed that Kixtel was starting to shake. Hey, relax. We're not going to destroy your son or anything. We're here to help you guys. But Kixtel wasn't feeling very reassured. In his mind, he was trying to imagine what kind of planet could produce beings who thought star-killing weapons were normal equipment. What kind of environment created creatures who spoke casually about tearing holes in reality? Meanwhile, 3 decks up on the flagship, Admiral Park was conducting his own briefing with the fleet commanders. The room was filled with humans in military uniforms, their faces serious and focused as they reviewed the tactical situation. Listen up, people, Park said, gesturing to the holographic display showing the harvester positions. We're dealing with an enemy that has already wiped out 47 different civilizations. They don't negotiate, they don't surrender, and they don't show mercy. So we won't either. The display showed red dots scattered across multiple star systems, each dot representing millions of harvester machines. To most species, it would look like an impossible situation. To the humans, it looked like Tuesday. Standard doctrine applies here, Park continued. Total elimination of threat capability. I don't want a single harvester unit left functional when we're done. No survivors, no escape pods, no prisoners. If it's mechanical and hostile, it gets recycled into scrap metal. Commander Choi raised his hand from the back of the room. Sir, what about collateral damage? The Zalani have civilian populations on several of these worlds. Park nodded approvingly at the question. Good point. We'll minimize civilian casualties wherever possible. But remember, mission completion is the priority. The Zalani asked us to save their civilization, not to fight with one hand tied behind our backs. Another officer spoke up. Admiral, intelligence reports suggest the harvesters might have some kind of learning capability. They adapt to enemy tactics. Park smiled grimly. Then we'll adapt faster. That's what we do. He looked around the room at his commanders, men and women who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. Any other questions? The room was silent. These were professional soldiers who understood exactly what they were being asked to do. They would eliminate the harvester threat completely and permanently, using whatever level of force was necessary. Good, Park said. Remember, people, we're not just fighting for the Zilani. Every machine we destroy here is one that won't be consuming some other innocent species next month. We end this threat here and now. The harvester machines appeared exactly where their pattern analysis predicted they would. For 3 months, they had been systematically consuming the Zilani worlds, and their artificial intelligence had calculated that this system would fall, just like all the others. They dropped out of hyperspace in their standard formation, millions of sleek, angular ships spreading out like a metallic cloud. But something was different this time. Instead of finding helpless civilian vessels and outdated defense platforms, the harvesters encountered something their programming had never seen before. 2,000 human warships hung in perfect formation, their hulls dark against the stars. The arrangement wasn't random. Every ship had a specific position, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible approach angle. Captain Yoon stood on the bridge of her cruiser, watching the enemy formation through the tactical display. She had been fighting in space for 12 years, and she recognized the harvester movement patterns immediately. They were predictable, almost boring in their mechanical precision. Enemy vessels maintaining standard swarm approach, reported her tactical officer. They're not changing formation to account for our presence. Yoon nodded. The harvesters were treating them like just another primitive species with a few patrol boats. Their artificial intelligence was calculating attack vectors based on the assumption that humans were no more dangerous than the peaceful Zilani. All ships. This is Captain Yoon, she announced over the fleet communication system. Enemy contact in 90 seconds. Weapons free on my command. The harvester swarm continued its approach, individual ships breaking off into smaller groups to surround what they assumed would be easy targets. Their tactics had worked perfectly against dozens of other species, overwhelmed the defenders with superior numbers, then strip mine their worlds for raw materials. 60 seconds to weapons range, called the tactical officer. On the Zilani command station, Ambassador Veltar watched in terror as the harvester cloud approached. Even with the massive human fleet, the enemy still outnumbered them heavily. The mechanical ships moved with deadly purpose, their weapons systems already charging for the first strike. 30 seconds, Yoon announced calmly. The bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, making final adjustments to targeting systems and power distribution. Nobody seemed nervous or excited. They were professionals doing a job they had trained for their entire careers. 10 seconds to optimal firing range. The harvesters were close enough now that individual ships could be seen on the visual displays. Sleek, angular vessels, bristling with weapons, each one larger than most Zilani fighters. They moved in perfect coordination, their artificial intelligence controlling the entire swarm as a single organism. Fire, Captain Yoon said simply. What happened next? Redefine space combat for every species watching. The human fleet didn't just shoot, they unleashed a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Quantum torpedoes streaked through space, tearing holes in reality itself as they punched through harvester shields. Point defense systems created walls of energy that vaporized entire squadrons of enemy fighters. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the weapons themselves. It was how quickly the humans adapted. When the first wave of harvester ships deployed energy shields to deflect the quantum torpedoes, the human fleet instantly switched to kinetic weapons. Massive tungsten slugs fired at near light speed simply smashed through the energy barriers. Like they weren't there. The harvester artificial intelligence tried to compensate, reinforcing their armor plating and deploying reflective surfaces to deflect energy weapons. The humans responded by revealing weapons systems that the Zilani had never seen before. Directed particle beams that ignored both shields and armor. Gravitational weapons that crushed ships by distorting space around them. How are they changing tactics so fast? Ambassador Veltar asked Admiral Park, his voice filled with amazement and fear. Park watched the tactical display with the calm satisfaction of someone watching a well-executed plan unfold. Ambassador, humans have been fighting wars against each other for over 10,000 years. We've faced every possible tactic, every kind of weapon, every strategy you can imagine. He gestured at the screen where harvester ships were being destroyed. These machines are actually less creative than most human opponents. At least other humans can think outside their programming. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over in 18 minutes. The Harvester Vanguard, which had expected to face a few dozen primitive ships, instead encountered the full might of human military doctrine refined through millennia of warfare. Not a single mechanical ship escaped to report back to the main fleet. As the last harvester vessel exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, Captain Yoon turned to her communications officer. Send a message to Admiral Park. Vanguard eliminated. No human casualties. Ready for Phase 2. The real fight was about to begin. The celebrations in the Zalani capital lasted exactly 4 hours. Across their remaining worlds, millions of peaceful herbivores danced in the streets, believing the nightmare was finally over. The terrible harvester machines had been defeated, and the humans had saved them all. But, while the Zalani were celebrating, the humans were working. Captain Hans stood in the command center of a massive construction ship, watching as automated systems assembled orbital defense platforms around every inhabited planet in the system. Each platform was the size of a small city, bristling with enough weapons to turn an entire continent into molten glass within minutes. Platform 7 is online and operational, reported his engineering officer. All weapon systems tested and ready? Estimated firepower equivalent to 50 heavy cruisers. Han nodded approvingly. Good. Move to the next position. I want complete coverage before the main enemy fleet arrives. Meanwhile, Colonel Moon was overseeing an even more ambitious project. Massive construction vessels had arrived and were literally reshaping the local solar system. Artificial gravity wells were being installed at strategic points, creating invisible traps that could drag enemy ships out of hyperspace at predetermined locations. Admiral Park, Moon reported over the communication system. Stellar fortification is 60% complete. The gravity wells are online and functioning perfectly. We've also begun construction of the backup shipyards in the outer system, on the Zalani command station. Ambassador Veltar had been monitoring human communications all day, and what he heard was making him increasingly nervous. The humans weren't acting like victorious liberators. They were acting like people preparing for a much bigger war. Backup shipyards. Veltar interrupted the conversation, his forearms gesturing frantically. Admiral Park, surely you're not planning to build even more ships. Your fleet is already larger than anything we've ever seen. Admiral Park turned to look at the alien diplomat, and there was genuine surprise in his expression. Of course, we're building more ships, Ambassador. What we just fought was obviously just a scouting force. The real harvester fleet is still out there somewhere, probably numbering in the millions. The Zalani delegation exchanged looks of absolute terror. If the force that had just devastated their entire civilization was merely a scouting party, what would the main enemy fleet look like? But Admiral Veltar said weakly, your current fleet is already incredibly powerful. Surely it would be sufficient for any threat. Ambassador, you have to understand. Park explained patiently. Humans don't fight battles hoping for the best. We prepare for the worst possible scenario, and then add extra forces just in case our estimates are wrong. Technical Officer Bay pulled up a holographic display showing projected enemy numbers. The screen filled with red dots representing potential harvester vessels, so many that they looked like a solid wall of hostiles. Based on standard harvester expansion patterns, Bay explained, in a matter-of-fact tone, we can expect their main fleet to outnumber our current forces by approximately 4,000 to 1. This falls well within acceptable parameters for human naval engagement doctrine. Veltar's voice cracked when he tried to speak. Acceptable? You consider being outnumbered 4,000 to 1 acceptable? Park looked genuinely confused by the alien's distress. Ambassador, that's actually quite favorable odds for us. Human military doctrine considers anything less than a 10,000 to 1 disadvantage to be unfair to the enemy. The room fell silent as the Zilani tried to process what they had just heard. These humans, who had already deployed the most powerful fleet in galactic history, considered themselves to have an unfair advantage. What kind of species thought that being outnumbered 10,000 to 1 was a fair fight? Sir, interrupted Communications Officer Kim, we're receiving reports from the outer perimeter. Long-range sensors are detecting massive hyperspace distortions. Something very large is approaching the system. Park nodded calmly. There we go, right on schedule. He turned to the Zilani delegation with what might have been a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Ambassador. We expected this. Captain Han's voice came over the communication system. Admiral, all defensive platforms are now online. Backup shipyards are operational and beginning production of additional vessels. We're as ready as we're going to be. Excellent, Park replied. Signal all fleet commanders. Phase 2 is about to begin. Veltar stared at the tactical display, watching as more human ships continued to arrive through hyperspace jumps. The humans had called this preparation, but it looked like the mobilization of an entire civilization for war, and according to them, they were still at a disadvantage. For the first time, Veltar began to wonder what kind of planet could have produced beings who thought this way. What sort of environment created creatures who planned for impossible odds and considered overwhelming force to be standard procedure? He was about to find out when the main harvester fleet finally arrived. It was like watching nightmares pour out of hyperspace. The enemy ships came in waves that seemed to never end, first thousands, then millions, until the entire star system was dark with mechanical vessels. They ranged from small fighter craft no bigger than shuttles to massive command ships that dwarfed planets. 17 million harvester vessels filled the space between worlds, their hulls gleaming with weapon systems and sensor arrays. The collective intelligence controlling them had consumed entire galactic sectors, turning countless civilizations into raw materials for building more ships. This was the force that had made the galaxy tremble for decades. On the Zilani command station, the mood had shifted from hope back to despair. Ambassador Veltar stared at the tactical display, watching as red enemy contacts continued to multiply. Even with the massive human fleet, they were still outnumbered by an impossible margin. This is it, whispered Captain Zaxani. We fought bravely, but no one could stand against this. The Zilani began preparing for what they called dignified extinction, the peaceful acceptance of death that their culture had developed over thousands of years. They would face the end with calm dignity, knowing they had done everything possible. But the humans had other plans. Admiral Park stood in the command center of his flagship, looking completely calm as he watched the enemy fleet deploy. Instead of despair, there was something like satisfaction in his expression. He turned to his communications officer and spoke 4 words that would echo through galactic history. Activate protocol, Omega. What happened next defied everything. The Zilani thought they knew about warfare. Hyperspace didn't just open in their local system, it tore apart across dozens of surrounding sectors. The rifts were so large they created their own gravitational effects, distorting space-time itself. The 5th human fleet arrived first, emerging from hyperspace like an avalanche of metal and energy. Then came the 7th fleet, followed by the 10th. Each new arrival brought not just warships, but entire mobile cities, shipyards that could construct new vessels in hours, factory ships that turned asteroids into ammunition, medical facilities. The size of space stations. Captain No stood on the bridge of his battleship, watching in amazement as humanity's true industrial capacity revealed itself. His ship was just one small part of a machine that spanned multiple star systems. Around him, the space that had seemed crowded with enemy vessels was now filled with human ships arriving in organized formations. "Captain, his weapons officer," reported, her voice filled with awe. "Final count shows 16 million human vessels now in the theater of operations, with another 8 million held in reserve positions." But even that wasn't the most shocking moment. The Zilani delegation watched in stunned silence as Admiral Park calmly issued orders that seemed to come from science fiction. Specialized human vessels moved to positions around 3 nearby black holes, the collapsed remains of ancient stars that warped space-time with their incredible gravity. "Engineering teams report successful gravitational anchor deployment," reported Technical Officer Bay. "Black holes Alpha, Beta, and Gamma are now under our control and ready for repositioning." Ambassador Veltar felt his legs give out beneath him. You moved black holes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Admiral Park glanced at him with mild surprise. "Just the small ones, Ambassador. The big ones require special authorization paperwork from Earth Command." He turned back to the tactical display, as if moving collapsed stars was a routine administrative task. The Zilani had thought they understood what humans were capable of. They had seen the massive fleets, the incredible weapons, the casual discussion of star-destroying technology. But this went beyond military power. This was the systematic reshaping of reality itself to serve as a weapon. "Sir," Communications Officer Kim reported, "all fleets report ready for engagement. Gravitational weapons are online and targeted. The enemy fleet is moving into optimal firing positions." Park nodded approvingly. "Signal all fleet commanders. Remind them that we're not just fighting for the Zilani. We're making sure this threat never endangers anyone else again." Captain No felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the enemy fleet approach. The harvesters had consumed 47 civilizations, treating the galaxy like their personal feeding ground. They had never encountered real resistance before. That was about to change. "All weapons ready, Captain," his tactical officer reported. Around them, 16 million human warships prepared to demonstrate why humanity had become the galaxy's apex predator in less than a century since leaving their home world. The harvesters were about to learn what happened when a species evolved on a planet where everything was constantly trying to kill everything else. The battle began like every other harvester conquest had for the past century. 17 million mechanical ships, spread out in their standard formation, preparing to overwhelm the defenders through pure numbers. Their artificial intelligence calculated victory probabilities based on successful campaigns against dozens of other species. But something was different this time. Commander Zhang watched the enemy approach from the bridge of her heavy cruiser, studying their movement patterns with the cold calculation of a born predator. Where other species had tried to maintain safe distances from the harvester swarms, Zhang was planning something that would have terrified most galactic civilizations. "All squadrons, prepare for close quarters engagement," she announced over the fleet communication system. "We're going right into the middle of them." Her tactical officer looked surprised. "Ma'am, that's exactly what they want. Their tactics are designed to trap enemies in close combat, where numbers matter most." Zhang smiled grimly. "Lieutenant, they've never fought humans before. They think numbers are an advantage. Let's show them what happens when you corner a predator." The human squadron dove straight into the heart of the harvester formation, their ships weaving between the mechanical vessels with deadly precision. Instead of being overwhelmed by enemy numbers, the humans used the crowded space to their advantage. When harvester ships tried to fire on the human vessels, they ended up hitting their own allies instead. "Enemy formation is breaking apart," reported Lieutenant Yu from the tactical station. "They can't maintain coordinated fire with us this close." But the harvesters weren't mindless machines. Their collective intelligence began adapting to human tactics. spreading their ships further apart and switching to short-range weapons designed for close combat. The mechanical vessels started moving in new patterns, trying to trap the human ships in crossfire zones. "The harvesters are learning from our attack patterns," you reported. "They're adapting their formations to counter our maneuvers." Zhang's response sent chills through every alien observer watching the battle. "Then we'll adapt faster." What happened next redefined what every species in the galaxy thought they knew about warfare. The human ships didn't just change tactics, they changed their weapons in real. Captured harvester technology was analyzed, improved, and integrated into human systems within minutes. "Ma'am," the engineering officer called out, "we've successfully reverse-engineered their shield generators. Our versions are 30% more efficient." "Excellent. Install them on all ships, and use the originals as targeting data for our weapons." Zhang watched as human vessels began incorporating enemy technology faster than the harvesters could develop countermeasures. The mechanical intelligence controlling the enemy fleet had been designed to overcome static defenses and predictable tactics. It could adapt to known weapon types and defensive strategies. But it had never encountered an enemy that evolved during combat, turning every harvester advantage into a human weapon. When the harvesters deployed new armor plating, the humans captured samples and developed armor-piercing rounds specifically designed to penetrate it. When the enemy switched to energy weapons, human ships absorbed the energy and redirected it into their own power systems. "This is impossible," whispered Ambassador Veltar from the Zalani command station. "No species can adapt that quickly." Admiral Park stood beside him, watching the tactical display with professional satisfaction. "Ambassador, you have to understand. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've learned to expect our enemies to adapt, so we always adapt faster." The tide of battle was turning in ways that the Harvester collective intelligence couldn't process. For the first time in their existence, the mechanical swarm was being outmaneuvered by creatures that thought faster and changed quicker than their programming could handle. When a large group of Harvester ships tried to retreat to hyperspace, they discovered that human vessels had somehow predicted their escape routes. The exits were blocked by human destroyers that had moved into position before the enemy even decided to retreat. How did they know where we would run? The Harvester collective seemed to ask through their frantic movement patterns. The answer was simple but terrifying. Humans had been hunting other humans for so long that predicting enemy behavior had become instinctive. The Harvesters, despite their technological superiority, were thinking like prey animals trying to escape, and humans were very, very good at catching prey. As more Harvester ships found their escape routes cut off, a realization began to spread through their collective consciousness. For decades, they had been the apex predator of the galaxy, consuming entire civilizations without meaningful resistance. But now they had encountered something that had evolved on a world where everything was constantly trying to kill everything else. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were learning what it felt like to be prey. The moment came when the Harvester collective intelligence realized it had made a fatal miscalculation. For the first time in their existence, the mechanical swarm was losing a battle. Their formations were broken, their ships were being destroyed faster than they could adapt, and their usual tactics were useless against an enemy that seemed to predict their every move. Communications Officer Shin looked up from her station with surprise. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the Harvester fleet. They appear to be attempting to disengage from combat." On the tactical display, the red dots representing enemy ships were pulling back from the human formations, moving toward the edges of the system where they could jump to hyperspace. After decades of conquest, the mechanical plague was trying to retreat for the first time. Admiral Park's response was immediate and final. "Negative. Continue prosecution. No ships leave this system." Ambassador Veltar felt his heart sink as he watched the human fleet change formation. Instead of allowing the defeated enemy to withdraw, The humans were moving to block every escape route. Admiral, surely now that they're retreating, we can allow them to leave. They've learned their lesson. Park turned to look at the Zilani diplomat, and there was something cold and final in his expression. Ambassador, these machines don't retreat to give up. They retreat to regroup, repair their losses, and find easier targets to consume. Maybe your people, maybe some other peaceful civilization that can't defend itself. The Admiral gestured toward the tactical display, where harvester ships were desperately trying to reach hyperspace jump points. This threat ends here, today, permanently. No survivors, no second chances, no possibility of them ever threatening anyone again. What followed wasn't really a battle anymore. It was a systematic extermination. The human fleet split into hunting groups, each one designed to track down and eliminate fleeing harvester vessels. Their faster-than-light drives allowed them to intercept enemy ships that had already jumped to hyperspace, pulling them back into normal space where they could be destroyed. Captain Rue commanded a destroyer group that specialized in hunting individual targets. Her ships moved through space like wolves, tracking down lone harvester scouts that tried to hide in asteroid fields or behind planetary rings. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Target acquired, her tactical officer reported. Single harvester reconnaissance unit attempting to shelter behind the gas giant's moons. Eliminate it, Rue ordered calmly. Make sure there are no pieces large enough to transmit data. Meanwhile, Commander Hong led his dreadnought squadron against larger targets. Entire harvester command fleets found themselves surrounded by human vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere. The mechanical ship's superior technology meant nothing when faced with tactics that had been perfected through millennia of human warfare. But Admiral Park had identified the real target. Signal all fleet commanders, he announced. Priority targets are their construction facilities. Every forged ship, every mobile factory, every automated shipyard. If it can build more harvesters, it gets destroyed. The humans began methodically hunting down the industrial backbone of the harvester civilization. These weren't combat vessels. They were the factories and construction ships that allowed the mechanical plague to reproduce itself. Without them, even surviving harvester units would eventually wear out and cease to function. The systematic elimination took 6 days. Human ships pursued, fleeing harvesters across multiple star systems, their superior speed and coordination allowing them to intercept every escape attempt. Construction facilities were vaporized, supply depots were reduced to scrap metal, and repair stations were turned into expanding clouds of debris. On the 6th day, Lieutenant Kim made the final report. Admiral long-range sensors show no active harvester signatures across 4 star systems. All enemy vessels and facilities have been eliminated. The mechanical plague that had consumed 47 civilizations over the course of decades was extinct. Not defeated, not driven off, but completely and permanently eliminated from the galaxy. Ambassador Veltar stared at the tactical display, which now showed only the blue dots of human vessels moving through empty space. Is it over? He asked quietly. Admiral Park nodded with grim satisfaction. The immediate threat is eliminated. Now we make sure it stays that way, as if to emphasize his point. Human engineering ships were already moving to establish permanent monitoring stations throughout the region. The threat was gone, but humanity would watch to ensure it never returned. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about what happened when you threatened a species that had evolved by constantly fighting for survival. 3 months after the last harvester ship had been reduced to scrap metal, the Zilani system looked completely different. What had been a war zone filled with millions of vessels was now returning to peaceful normalcy. But the humans weren't celebrating their victory, they were methodically packing up their massive war machine with the same cold efficiency they had used to deploy it. Captain O stood on the bridge of her command ship, overseeing the final withdrawal operations. Around her, The enormous human fleet was disappearing piece by piece. Mobile shipyards that had been churning out new vessels folded their massive structures and vanished into hyperspace. Orbital defense platforms powered down their weapons systems and detached from their positions around the Zilani worlds. All fleet units report ready for departure, her operations officer announced. The automated monitoring stations are online and fully operational. Long-range sensor networks are active across the entire sector. Captain O nodded and opened a communication channel to Admiral Park. Sir, final evacuation is complete. All human personnel and equipment have been withdrawn, except for the monitoring systems. On the Zilani command station, Ambassador Veltar watched the last preparations with mixed feelings. The massive human presence that had seemed so permanent was dissolving before his eyes. Within hours, the system would be empty except for automated sensors and the occasional patrol ship. Admiral Park arrived for their final meeting, looking exactly as calm and professional as he had on the first day. Ambassador, I wanted to personally confirm that the Harvester threat has been completely eliminated. Our sensor networks will monitor this entire region of space, and if anything similar ever emerges, we'll know about it immediately. Velt chose his words carefully. The past 3 months had taught him to be very respectful when speaking to humans about military matters. Admiral, your people's response to our distress call was far beyond anything we could have imagined or expected. Park smiled, but there was something cold in his expression that reminded Veltar why humans were so effective at warfare. Ambassador, you have to understand something about humanity. When we decide to help someone, we don't do things halfway. We don't send token forces or make symbolic gestures. We identify the threat, and then we eliminate it completely. The human admiral gestured toward the tactical display, which now showed peaceful space where millions of enemy ships had once gathered. Your people are safe now, and they'll stay safe. The Harvester threat doesn't exist anymore, anywhere in the galaxy. As the last human vessels prepared to jump to hyperspace, Veltar realized he was witnessing something historic. In just a few months, humanity had permanently changed the balance of power in the galaxy. They hadn't just won a battle, they had eliminated an entire hostile civilization so thoroughly that it could never threaten anyone again. The final human ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only the faint energy signatures of the monitoring stations. The Zilani were alone again, but they were alone in a galaxy that was suddenly much safer. News of the human intervention spread across civilized space within days. Species that had lived in terror of the Harvester threat for decades learned that the mechanical plague had been completely destroyed by newcomers, who had only been in space for a few generations. Other civilizations began to understand something important about humanity. These weren't just another species with advanced technology. They were something entirely new, beings who approached warfare not as a political tool or a last resort, but as a precise science designed to permanently solve problems. The humans didn't seek glorious victories or honorable defeats. They didn't negotiate with threats or show mercy to enemies. When they identified something as dangerous to peaceful civilizations, they eliminated it with the same methodical precision they might use to remove a cancer. Within a year, diplomatic missions from dozens of species were traveling to Earth, seeking to understand these remarkable beings who had casually accomplished what the rest of the galaxy thought was impossible. They found humans who were friendly, helpful, and genuinely interested in peace. But every diplomat left Earth with the same message for their home governments. Humanity was very, very good at making sure their friends stayed safe, and the methods they used to ensure that safety were more effective than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans had become the galaxy's peacekeepers, and they were far more terrifying than any threat they might face. Because when humanity decided that something needed to be destroyed for the greater good, it stayed destroyed. Peace through superior firepower wasn't just a human motto. It was a promise to every peaceful species in the galaxy that they would never have to face extinction alone.